Hello my friends, welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and in today's video, I'm going to help you make the best legendary accessories for your account in Rise of Kingdoms. And a lot of conversation has been happening recently about war drums in particular, and I realized as I was thinking about what kind of video I wanted to make that the context for accessories has meaningfully changed in Rise of Kingdoms. Why is that? We've got the addition of combo attacks, we've got the addition of additional stats, which by the way makes a meaningful difference for things like Dagger and Web. We're going to talk about all of that and more in this video, and if you like videos designed to help you get value and smash your enemies, consider smashing the subscribe button. Thank you for your support, because guess what? I didn't think I needed to make this video. I've made 2 or 3 videos where I'm like, here's the best legendary accessories in Rise of Kingdoms. And for years, I've been saying some very consistent messages. But I actually have experience with a lot of these different legendary accessories, including another account where I also have drums, for what it's worth. And the conversation recently has shifted. So let me just share what the meta has been up to this point and what people are saying perhaps the meta might be now, which is that up until this point, you pretty much wanted to get, in a perfect world, as you see on this march, you get a horn for rage generation and you get a ring for a damage boost. Both obviously give you damage, but you understand what I'm saying. One helps you generate rage, thus you will do more damage. The other just gives you a damage boost, which hopefully aligns with your active skills or instant proc damage. And this, by the way, has been sort of understood to be the meta. What we were doing back in the day, and what my guidance has been, is that you basically put this combination of accessories on every single march, and on one army, or split somewhere among your armies, you'd potentially put a dagger and you'd potentially put a web. And that was historically what the guidance was. Now today, I might not steer you in the direction of making dagger and web, although combo attack might sort of change that, and let me explain first and foremost in this video why maybe we don't do dagger and web. And by the way, if you're subscribed to my channel, you know I've got timestamps, so you can jump to whichever part of this video you like. If you're already like, I don't need a dagger or a web, just jump ahead, right? So dagger and web are kind of neat. They make it so that you reduce the health of an enemy and it stacks up. So it's a total of 15% potentially. And also the web reducing defense. I would argue that if you're going to swarm garrisons, these are a slam dunk. It's not even really a question, because we're talking about 12 things benefiting from this, including the rally that's hitting that garrison benefits from the health reduction on the target. But in general, the value of these has declined. Why? The reason is really simple to understand. I made a video about this probably over 4 years ago now, how there are diminishing returns on stats. In other words, the more of a stat you get, the less valuable each stat point is. Ergo, it stands to reason that once people have lots and lots of stats, reducing somebody from 140% health to 135 or 130% health is not as valuable as taking them from 70% health down to 55% health, because there's diminishing returns. Each additional percentage of stat gain is doing less and less and less. That's how this game works. So inherently, Dagger and Web got weaker as they released iconic tiers of equipment and as they released formations where people got many, many, many extra percentage points of stats. But recently, we see a slight resurgence of the relevance of those sorts of debuffs because of Arthur, and specifically combo attacks, where each combo attack can trigger something that will be triggered by a basic attack. So interestingly, Dagger gets a lot more potential. Web gets a lot more potential than it had before, because now you've got a way to trigger multiple instances of it in a single turn, right? Like you could get a dagger debuff going very, very, very quickly and stack rapidly. Now, what are the criticisms against dagger and web these days? Besides the fact that there's these diminishing returns that I've told you about, the other thing is that combat is very poke focused and you don't typically stick to the same target anyways. And it's hard to really get the full benefit of these things where you're stacking up a debuff. So these days for dagger and web, I would land more in the realm of if you have them, use them and enjoy them. If you don't have them, probably don't craft them unless you plan to swarm garrisons, because if you're swarming a garrison, that's a stationary target. It's going to stack up. You can get a lot of value. It scales based on the number of marches swarming the thing. Also, by the way, if you're swarming rallies, right? Like it's very valuable there, where everybody swarming the same thing with you gets the benefit. Okay. So that's where dagger and web are good. But for your average field player, Probably not something you need to make. Okay, cool. 2 accessories knocked off the list. That's pretty cool. Yes, indeed. But now we need to talk about what potentially is, if we're not making Dagger and Web, is it still going to be the horn and the ring? And the funny thing is that I would have thought this is kind of a slam dunk, but recently, and you, if you're subscribed to the channel, know that Chisgule and Cortex and I were talking about the idea of, do you make a horn and also drums and go for more rage? More rage. Well, gosh, has the context changed. So for those of you that don't know, drums are something I've advocated against for a long time. Why is that? If we get a look at the drums, you can see that what they do is they generate 50 rage to your march and 2 others, and there's a 10% chance for it to trigger with a 3-second cooldown. Now, at this point, we're going to need to look at some basic math here, but if you get a look at the horn, this is a 30% chance to give 50 rage, no internal cooldown, which, by the way, scales insanely well with combo attacks, because it can trigger multiple times per turn, which is nuts. But the argument I have made for a very, very, very long time is that you'd always rather have a horn than drums. And the reason for that is very easy to understand. We're going to do some very basic math. This is probably not perfect, but like, this is napkin math, but it's going to be very, 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 very easy to understand why it is that horn is just better than drums. And very simply, the rage per second you get from drums is 50 times 3, 150 rage total. It's split across the 3 marches, but we're just going to showcase the total amount of rage generated. There's a 10% chance for it to trigger from any basic attack, and a 3-second internal cooldown. It's a deep oversimplification to do the math this way, but for the sake of understanding the approximate power level, 11.5 average rage per second from drums, whereas the horn, it's got a 30% chance to trigger. So it's going to trigger 3 times every 10 seconds. So that's 150 total rage in a 10-second window, which is about 15 rage per second. And so you can see inherently the horn is just better than drums. It just is better, straight up. Okay. This is even shown in game, by the way. If I put this away real quick, you can see the power level, equipment level 40, right? Like the power level of this is equipment level 40. And the power level of horn is equipment level 45. That doesn't mean necessarily that in all situations one is better than another, but the inherent power level of horn is higher, and that is quite literally by design of the game. But the question that is being asked recently is, what about Chisgule going with the horn and the drums, right? And this is what Chisgule was sort of talking about recently and what we talked about on stream. And this is a very interesting topic that, again, I've covered very in depth in the past. So if we're revisiting this topic, what must have changed about the state of the game that suddenly drums will be better than they were before? And there's actually a couple things that would make that true. The first thing that would make that potentially true is the sort of relationship between active skills and normal attacks and counterattacks. The damage factor of normal attacks and counterattacks has not really changed at all, not in a meaningful way, whereas the damage factor on active skills in the end game has gone up so dramatically, it's actually jaw-dropping, right? We're talking about shocking amounts of damage factor on new commanders compared to the old commanders that really, it's like laughable how much damage some of them do. Okay, so the value of active skills has gone way up, like dramatically up, like actually kind of doubled since the beginning of the game. I'm just shooting from the hip on that number, but like actually kind of doubled. So if it is true that the value of an active skill has gone up, then the value of rage is higher. And I'm making the argument that, okay, I get that we have combo attacks and other things which make normal attack boosts more relevant, but your normal attack and counterattack damage factor has not changed. And I forget what the exact number is. I think it's like 200 factor for a normal attack and 200 factor for a counterattack, something like that, right? And the damage scales up or down with the number of troops you have, but that's also true of active skills, right? These factors, right? But the difference is that the number you get over here has gone way, way up, and the number you get on a normal and a counter has not changed. Okay, so if the base factor has sort of not changed for normals and counters, and it's gone way up on active skills, then you could make the argument that yes, for active skills, having more rage is looking really, really good. And as you probably saw, as I sort of teased earlier, there's some interesting stuff to learn with regard to generating more rage. Quite literally, 4 years ago, I said that the more rage you generate, the more rage you want, which sounds weird until you actually do some very, very basic napkin math. I want to emphasize, this is not intended to be perfect. It's just basic napkin math, okay? Which is that if your active skill, let's call it the active skill cycle, does 100 damage, okay? And that skill cycle is 10 seconds. That means you're getting 10 DPS from your active skills, okay? That's damage per second. Now, if you take that to a 9-second skill cycle, now your DPS, same damage, but you do it in 9 seconds. Now you have 11.1 DPS, all right? That's a 1.1 DPS boost from the prior, which is an 11% damage boost. So if you can take your skill cycle from 10 to 9 seconds, you get an 11% damage boost. That's pretty legit, right? Now that's a percent damage boost to your active skill damage, just to be really, really clear, right? Now, what I've always said is more rage is better. And the reason starts to be really, really clear because if you go from a 9-second skill cycle to an 8-second skill cycle, now you're looking at a 12.5% damage boost. If you go from an 8-second skill cycle to a 7-second skill cycle, you're looking at a 14.3% damage boost. You see where this is going? If you go from a 6-second skill cycle to a 5-second skill cycle, that is a 20% damage boost. And that is a really big deal because obviously, this like makes sense, right? Like what we're talking about is gaining rage. The same 100 rage gained is really, really impactful if what you're telling me is that same 100 rage is now making it so that every 5 seconds I'm using active skills instead of every 9 seconds I'm using active skills. Which is why, although this is napkin math, and I deeply, repeatedly want to emphasize that napkin math is not perfection, the point that I'm trying to illustrate, I think, is sound, which is the faster your rage cycle is, the more you want to generate rage. But there's a problem. And there's a problem I've talked about for a very long time, which is that there is a rage cap. The rage cap on any one turn is 220. So although the more rage you generate, the more you want to be generating rage, the problem is that rage capping works as follows. The game will give you all the rage that you would have gotten in a single turn. Let's say it's 1,000. And no matter how much rage you would have gained, it says, great, that's lovely. The most you could have gained is 220. Sucks to suck. So however much you overraged is completely and immediately removed. So 220 is the max you could do in any one turn. Then the game applies reductions to rage. So you can get really wrecked by rage reductions. But the point that I wanted to make is that although it's nice to say more rage means that you want to generate more rage because you're getting to a faster and faster skill cycle, there are many, many problems with that. First of all, the more rage you generate, the more you're likely to overrage, which means although theoretically, more rage means you're getting like this 20% damage boost over just, the prior turn. Well, not exactly, because generating rage could mean that you get zero benefit. I want to emphasize that. Generating rage could mean that you got literally zero benefit at all. So what are the situations where generating rage could yield zero benefit? Well, one is you generated too much rage in a turn. One is you're silenced. Another is you're walking away from combat and leave combat, so rage bar drops entirely. Another situation, there's like so many of these, right? But the point that I'm trying to make is that there are a lot of situations where you would think generating more rage is really awesome. But also, although once you generate lots of rage, you want more rage, the more rage you generate, the more likely it is that rage is wasted. So it sort of balances itself out is what I'm trying to say, where to some extent, generating more rage will mean more rage waste. At the same time, generating more rage becomes more valuable if you're hitting these breakpoints. And breakpoints is an idea I talked about long ago, okay? And the idea of a breakpoint is if you generate extra rage and none of it is even over rage, how cool is that? Zero over rage, but You didn't make the breakpoint for going a turn sooner. In other words, like you need 1,000 rage to use an active skill. Okay, this is a basic active skill. If you're generating rage and you're getting these boosts and it's like, yeah, let's go, but you get to 970 rage. That's awesome, but you still don't use your active skill. You see the problem? So if you don't make the breakpoint of, oh, I have over 1,000 rage now, which means I'm going to use my active skill, you might also be wasting rage. It's like yet another way where like generating rage is awesome and on paper it looks insane, but in practice also can potentially not be as good. Because there are these situations where like you miss the breakpoint or you get silenced, right? Or. Now that said, I do think big picture, things are shifting more and more toward, hey, generating rage is looking really cool. Why would that be the case? Well, as I said, the more rage you generate, the more interesting it is to generate even more rage, even though you'll lose some to inefficiency. And the reason that it's kind of interesting is now we have echelon formation with civilized. Yet another way to be generating rage on other marches. So this gets really interesting and complicated where, gosh, like, so if you are advocating that generating rage from drums is good, based off of this very easy to understand and simple explanation, then you should be bought in to generating rage quite literally in every single way you can find it. You want Horn, you want Talents, you want Civilized, you want Trajan, you want William. If you believe that generating rage is powerful, and you don't think you're going to be losing too much value from overrage, right? You would want as much as possible. So you're like, okay, Chisgule, but bro, get back to the topic. Are we making drums or not? What are we doing? So I have some very simple thoughts there. All right. All of this context is incredibly relevant, but on the topic of drums, if you swarm garrisons, which I do, I'm not a huge fan of drums because what's going to happen is my marches are going to be circling and 2 of them are going to be hitting and drums are going to proc and it's going to buff my marches that are circling and it's doing literally nothing for me. So I'm not a fan of drums in the context of someone who's a really big player that's going to be swarming garrisons. I don't think so. Okay. I don't think so. Unless you're going to have some big coordination and be like, hold up, Chisgule plus Fluffy Pony, you guys are swarming. And it's like, well, even then somebody's going to have marches circling between the 2 of us, right? I think the place where drums is a very obvious choice in the open field is actually on a specific type of march. I mean, if we're not using Dagger and we're not using Web, then I would argue the place for drums is on a commander like Trajan or Philip. And more likely for most people these days, it's going to be your Philip army, where you might consider dropping in 1 drums, right? I certainly wouldn't dismantle for it. But like the place where you might consider it is on a march like Philip. Why? Well, so here's the deal. What we're really talking about is, should you use Ring? Or should you use the drums, right? And we're trying to figure out where am I going to get the bigger percentage boost to my total damage dealt? Well, the reality is that although Ring is really cool, and we've got a 10% chance to gain a 50% boost to damage dealt for 2 seconds. I mean, if I do my same napkin math, right? It's got a 5-second internal cooldown. Let me do my basic napkin math in the same way I did for drums and horn, and let me put that in the sheet. So we've got a 50% damage boost for 2 seconds. It's got a 10% chance to trigger with a 15% internal cooldown, or a 5-second internal cooldown. Oh my God. Too much happening right now. So what we do is like something like this. I know I don't need these parentheses, but just to make it look easier. So you're getting a total of 100% damage over the 15 seconds, which is approximately a 6.666% damage boost, right? I'm sure some people have done better statistical analysis around the actual number that this is, but like, right? Like that's like really what we're talking about the Ring DPS boost. Now, the difference, if you try to compare this sort of percent boost, we'll make this a percent. Okay, I'll just do that for the sake of simplicity here. There we go. Got to fix my thing here, divide by 100. All right, we're big chilling, right? 6.67%. You might look at this and go, oh, well, gee, like this, just improving your skill cycle by 1 second over here is a way bigger percentage than that. True, but the ring is way less susceptible to all the problems that you can have with rage. In other words, ring is not susceptible to overrage. Ring is not susceptible per se to silence. I mean, it kind of is, but not in the same way that overraging is, right? Like, ring is not susceptible to breakpoints in the same way that rage is. Ring, you do want to align, obviously, with your active skills, but on average, it's a 6.6% damage boost, just straight up goodness, right? Just straight up. So the comparison here gets a little bit weird. What you need to really look at is what percentage of your total damage comes from skills versus normals and counters, right? Basics and counters, I guess, is what I mean. And look at the total percent damage boost, because this is a total percent damage boost. This is a percent damage boost to your active skills, right? By going sooner. It's not really an apples to apples comparison. You can't compare them in that way, right? But I would argue that obviously this percent damage boost is way less exciting on a pairing that's not there to do damage. So in other words, back on target here, when we talk about a march like Trajan, or we talk a march like Philip, more realistically, because pretty much everybody went in, hopefully, and they might have prioritized a Philip. You could have done other stuff. You could have done Ragnar. He's freaking amazing. Liu Che, like that. Arthur, like those three, I would argue were also amazing choices when we did these commander swaps. But anyways, on the topic of like a commander like Philip, I think it's really good to use on a commander like Philip because, yeah, like you can boost his damage, and that's lovely. And depending on who your secondary is, they get the benefit of it, maybe. But some number of turns, boosting Philip's damage, and then he does his active skill, it's not really much different than, just boosting the normals and counters. In fact, that's probably all it ends up doing in some cases when he's using his active skill. Whereas you could theoretically over here align with sort of Zhuge Liang doing his big sort of area of effect damage. So my sort of stance right now on like, should we do drums or not, is that if you have a march like a Trajan or a Philip, I think these days it's way more interesting. It was always kind of good, but it's way more interesting to go in and say, okay, I buy in now to the philosophy and to put it on that march. So, for this account, I would at some point like to get rid of this ring and replace it with drums. I have other priorities right now. I have lots of accessories I can work with. So it's really, for me, not a priority. And that's kind of where I sit. Like, I think I'm going to get bigger DPS boosts, not switching out what accessories I use, but by actually just improving the equipment I have. I mean, 120 legendary materials, that's a big commitment, bro. I think at this point, my stance is if you're an open fielder who purely open fields, I still really like Horn and Ring with drums on marches that are doing more buffing than damage. Now, that said, if I change my perspective, which I might, I'm going to update the pinned comment, right? And I may make a separate video going in depth, trying to figure out how in the world I'm going to real world test this. And it's very difficult to do. Like you could run a simulation against a punching bag, which is really cool. We have simulation tools now that we did not have when I made my videos. It's just like, hey, I got to do spreadsheet math. But the problem is that it doesn't account for Guan silence, which rage generation is way more susceptible to than ring procs are. For the reasons we talked about. It doesn't account for the sort of back and forth nature of things. And although ring also suffers a little bit from the back and forth nature, right? There's like all these different things that can happen that we need to account for. So my stance for now continues to be, I like ring, I like horn. If you swarm garrisons, stick with those. Otherwise, I think drums on a march like Trajan looks really good. And if you're swarming garrisons, then Dagger and Web are really, really cool. But there are a couple other accessories we do need to talk about very briefly here, okay? And like I said, I still need to go in and do some I don't know how the heck I'm going to test this, but I'd like to do some testing with drums and sort of see how I feel. But let's just really quickly switch on over to the other accessories, because I think some things here may surprise you, which is that first of all, okay, maybe this won't surprise you. Pendant of Eternal Night has dropped dramatically in value since I originally talked about it. It is a level 45 accessory, but The problem is that it's only enhancing skill damage. If you're going to make one of these, you've got to be bought into fat AoE skill damage. Tragic news about that, they don't make fat AoE skill damage archers in the same way that they used to. Not like Zhuge Liang is bad, but the problem is that now they're moving in the direction of this healing true damage. So I just don't know how relevant this will be. And already this is, in my opinion, one of the weakest accessories out there. I made mine back before other accessories existed, right? Like the core accessories that we talk about today didn't exist when I made this. All right, Vengeance. Vengeance is obviously really powerful for garrisoning anti-swarm, primarily. That's pretty much it. Rallying, you don't necessarily want this. It can be fine to like wreck people that swarm your rally, but I'd rather do more damage to the garrison, personally. And like have something that's good for hitting the garrison in case they don't swarm at all, and also wrecks other people. But for garrisoning where you know you're going to get swarmed, like this is the choice, right? This is it. Meanwhile, over here, Lucky Coin. Can we talk about this for a second? Because like secretly combo attack made this way better and nobody's talking about this. So whenever the Wearer's Troop is hit with any type of basic attack, well, combo attacks qualify as basic attacks, do they not? Am I crazy, or are Lucky Coins suddenly way more in style than they were before? Not that they were particularly in style, so way more still, multiplier on a small number, still a small number. But the point I'm trying to make is garrisoning with a Lucky Coin just got way more interesting, right? Because like even just against a rally, if you want your garrison to not pop, which like, hey, we're talking about Kingsland, we just want to live. We just want the flag to not burn. Lucky Coin just got way more compelling. People are going to be hitting you with these combo attack cav rallies that are going to, in a single skill cycle, drop an extra 5 basic attacks, maybe more on you. Probably like more like 8 extra basic attacks. Okay, well, suddenly this got really good. Historically, this has just been really good when you're getting swarmed and you want to live. Particularly, I think this is very good for Ark of Osiris for that reason, where like I just want the garrison to hold, and I actually don't want to kill their troops. I want to lock them in place, swarming my garrison. I mean, look, I'm not a master of Ark of Osiris. Maybe they're all just using this, but the point I'm trying to make is Lucky Coin gets way more compelling under the assumption that the combo attacks from the new cavalry could be triggering this a whole heck of a lot more. You have my attention. Unfortunately, for pure open fielding, I would say it's still not a great choice, because unless you have other really insane shielding synergy, which realistically no commanders do, not even Guan, I would call it amazing synergy. Just say it technically is a synergy. But once we get more open field combo players, this is going to get really interesting. Today, I think most people probably are using Arthur as the secondary, with the exception of top tier kingdoms, where you see it more as the primary. All right. So I think Lucky Coin is going to be really interesting, but probably mellow on that for now, unless you're a garrison captain. And then you have your eyes peeled, because that's very interesting. And then Seth's Call, this one has always been subpar. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, with diminishing returns and the existence of more stats, continues to be kind of subpar. The problem is that 10% attack is just not very impressive these days. And yes, like your army gets it and 2 others, but it's still not all that impressive. Now, Echelon with this gives it more relevance than it's ever had. Why is that? Echelon makes this percent boost go to 12% to the other marches. So 10% for the main march and 12% for the other marches. That's cool. But if you have Civilized, this also, I believe, triggers Civilized, which means now you're talking about putting 25 rage onto those marches as well, which is kind of like a mini drums effect. So at that point, you're asking, would I rather have the drums rage per second and go pure rage, or would I rather have, a small amount of rage and an attack boost? I mean, it's kind of neat. I still would not say that this is top tier, even under perfect situation, which would be on a civilized march. And like, I don't know. I probably would rather just have the drums for the rage. Probably. But we are talking, I did some math on this the other day in my legendary guard chat, where I was like, the attack bonus per second plus rage bonus, and I compared them. Let me pull it up. All right, so what I said in my legendary guard chat is once every 13 seconds, it's a 10% chance to trigger from basic, plus an internal cooldown of 3 seconds. You deliver 10% attack to your march and 12% attack and 25 rage to 2 other marches. So in total, the benefit is 3.8 rage per second and about 7.8 attack percent per second. So to compare apples to apples, Drums is 11.5 rage per second. This is napkin math. It's not perfect. Just bear with me. It's all calculated the same way. So, like, would you rather have 11.5? And remember, that's not, oh man, there's so much going on here. It's not 7.8 percent attack per march. It's just total, all totaled up. So would you rather have 11.5 rage per second or 3.8 rage per second and 7.8 attack per second? And it's like, what would you rather have? So if we get down to brass tacks, it's 7.7 rage per second versus 7.8 attack per second. That's actually the comparison. Wow, that's actually kind of interesting when you break it down that way, isn't it? Would you rather have a little bit of attack or a little bit of rage? And like, it's not much of either, but that's the choice. Makes me reconsider Seth's call, doesn't it? But that only applies if you have Echelon. It's a very niche situation. Most people just shouldn't bother, probably. I would say probably not, right? Like the two things you want almost certainly on a fill-up-like march is going to be using something like, your horn, 100%, you're using a horn, and then either drums or a Seth's Call, if you have civilized Seth's Call. If you don't have civilized, which 99.9% of the rock population doesn't, what are we even talking about? Like, it's not, you wouldn't even consider Seth's Call. Would not even consider. Okay. Whereas a ring, by the way, is just 6.6% all damage boost, about, right? Or a horn is about 15 rage per second. Anyways, yeah, that's where I'm at with Seth's Call. It's like, man, it got suddenly very interesting, but probably still you'd rather have other stuff. And let's see, Greatest Glory, I think is best for Smite, Rally, and Garrison. But otherwise, even if you think you're going to get swarmed, this gets really good. But otherwise, you might just use a horn and you might just use a ring, honestly. Like, it kind of depends. Like, if I'm getting swarmed, I use ring and glory. If I'm not getting swarmed, I use horn plus either glory or a ring. I think technically you might eke out more damage with a ring than a Greatest Glory, right? Because the Greatest Glory, I mean, I have it. I can just show you. But now we're talking about Rally Garrison. I mean, so, on Liu Che, we're looking at 6.5% damage boost with talent. Without talent, it's just 5%, right? Because boosting your normal on a smite damage dealing pair is going to be normal, basic attack, counter attack, and your smite damage. So I actually think, based on the napkin math we did, ring representing 6.6% damage boost is pretty good. It gets weird because there's diminishing returns though. So it's not as straightforward and clear cut as it seems. That's what I'm trying to say. It is not so straightforward, but whatever. Good enough for an approximation. And I think that's where I'm at. Have we covered every accessory? I feel like we probably have at this point. Yeah? Maybe? Yes. We have covered all the legendary accessories. GG. So, long story short, unless you got a siege march and you're making one of these plumes, maybe. I think most people are looking at still horn and ring. And it's especially true if you swarm garrisons, and lots of people are going to pile in with you. But also, I think drums are more viable than ever. So if you had drums, great news for you. Your investment there really paid off because they've only gotten better based off of, in my opinion, not only the addition of more ways to generate rage, but also the sort of active skills just getting better and better and better and better over the course of the game in a way that is not scaling with normal attack and counterattack damage. And specifically normal attack, basic attack, I should say, damage factor, and counterattack damage factor. This is how I've been playing the game for a long time, because it used to just be normal attacks and counterattacks, and then they added the language of basic attacks, and you got to relearn it all, whatever. So, yeah, horns, rings, primarily, in my opinion. But also, if you're making drums, I think it's better than ever. And also, on marches like Philip, it looks extremely strong. And also, theoretically, there are some breakpoints you got to hit in order for them to be relevant. So, you could do some really nerdy stuff on how much rage each of your marches is generating per turn on average to try to figure out how many drums you might need to hopefully, if the buffs land in the right places, give you extra turns without wasting the rage. And I think the thing that is important to account for and easy to miss on is the fact that there are a lot of situations where that rage will be actually fully 100% wasted. Okay? If you're silenced, if you don't hit the breakpoint, if you overrage, right? Just to name a few. If you leave combat before using your active skills, right? There's like a lot of these situations. But generally, I do think drums are kind of stronger than ever. And I think I would not fault anyone for making some drums instead of rings, quite frankly. Because at this point, I would argue the damage difference there is pretty slim. But if you're on that plan, okay, of saying, well, I'm going to be a drummer, all right, then you're probably using William, you're probably using Trajan, you're probably using Civilized, and you're probably just going all in. Unless you believe that, like, no, Trajan actually just sucks. Which is like, okay, fine, maybe you believe that you'd rather have a DPS commander, right? But I don't know. I think, I would think more top kingdoms will be talking about how powerful drums is and how critical it is if they felt that that was the case. And maybe after this video and all the other people talking about it, that's what we'll see. Guess we'll find out. I'm going to update my pinned comment when I go in and do either a bunch of testing or find out more information about, sort of horn versus drums. And also maybe at Merits, an additional separate video once I've gone and spent, God only knows how many hours that's going to take, by the way. Definitively proving that is going to be very, very, very difficult to do. Because you just so many things to account for. Like, Guan absolutely obliterates the rage strategy. It is disgusting how much Guan shuts that down. And I've seen that in Canyon. Like, it is disgusting how much he shuts it down. So you are very, very vulnerable to silences. Like, if the developers ever put another silence in the game and you went this rage strategy, GG, nice to know you. You're so cooked. If they put another silence, and I know they have one on Flavius, but that's not quite cutting it, right? It's like Guan is shockingly relevant in the sort of world we're in. Whatever. You enjoyed the vid, throw a like on here, subscribe. And until next time, you have fun smashing your enemies. You want to see my original video on this topic? One of them anyways. I'll have a card in the end screen. You want to see Chisgule talk about this and what I said 4 years ago? Here's the video. It's honestly kind of shocking that, like, same topics. Context has changed, though. Enjoy it.